going to show you a few basic processes that will be useful when making joints in wood. One of the most important tools when making joints is a tenon saw. Its features are a rectangular blade with fine teeth and a spine. The spine on this particular saw is made of fairly heavy gauge brass. It plays two roles. Its first role is to keep the thin blade straight, but its second role is to add some weight to the saw. This means that however small you may be, you don't have to press the saw into the wood. There is a smaller version, a dovetail saw. This has even finer teeth and is used for very accurate work. In order to saw straight, there are three approaches. The first is to rely on a marking knife line. Check that the stock is against the edge of the wood, slide it along, and using the point of the knife, make 1 or 2 cuts. This is more accurate than the pencil line and will assist us to make a neat cut. Now, we take the bench hook and secure it in the vise. Place the wood against the stop of the bench hook. We need to saw on the waste side of the line. The saw should saw half the pencil line away and leave half the pencil line on the wood. Holding the saw in this position, and the position is very important, even if your wrist is small and appears weak, it is actually very strong when it's straight, like this. Your elbow should be near your body, and there should be a straight line from the front of the saw up your arm when looking from the front. Point your finger along the saw. I begin the saw cut on the corner furthest from myself, positioning the saw against the end of my thumb. I'm trying to saw on the waste side of the line. I'm trying to saw away half the pencil line and leave half the pencil line on the wood. This is called sawing into the waste side. Once I've established my saw cut, I can begin to saw the saw level across the face of the wood. It's important to saw the saw level. If I saw level straight away, the saw will skid about, will mark the wood, and I won't get an accurate cut. I can now continue sawing through the wood. In this case, I'm sawing down halfway through the wood. It's important here not to tilt the saw, otherwise the center part of the joint is not cut. The second approach to sawing accurately is to chop across the marking knife line with a chisel. This deepens the marking knife line. Position the chisel very accurately in the marking knife line, the flat side towards the line, bevel edge towards the waste of the wood, and hold the chisel upright. The third approach is having chopped across the line to then pare a trough across in the waste of the wood. This forms a shoulder which will help you position the saw accurately. It's important when sawing to always have your work firmly held. If you're making a joint like this, which doesn't go all the way through the wood, you can grip the wood in the vise. I obviously can't saw right the way through. This is probably the best way to hold the wood. But of course, if you need to saw right through the wood, you'll need a bench hook. It's called a bench hook because it's hook-shaped. This is fixed firmly in the vise. The wood is put against the stop of the bench hook, and the work will be held firmly while you saw. This makes sawing easy and safe. The bench hook also prevents the saw from damaging the bench top. One further way on this type of bench is to use a clamp. You'll need a piece of scrap wood called softening to protect your work from damage by the clamp. Position the softening and your work carefully and tighten the clamp firmly. The work is then held for sawing. You obviously can't saw the way through when it's held like this, or indeed if you're using a chisel. If you have a leerwad type of bench, you can hold your wood in the tail vise. I've positioned the joint so it's over the side of the bench, so I can saw right the way through. Note once again, straight arm, straight wrist, finger pointing along the saw. It's also possible, of course, to use a bench hook in the tail vise and to saw as before. If you wish to saw a wide board, you can use the tail vise and these bench dogs, which slot into holes in the bench top. They can be raised to about the height of the wood, and when the vise is tightened, will grip the wood securely. You can position the wood once again to one side of the bench top so that I can saw right the way through. Now, if you've not managed to saw it square, or you've received a piece of wood with an end already roughly sawn, there are several alternative methods for squaring the end. On a smaller piece of wood, you could use a shooting board and plane, or a sanding disc if you have one. You must have your teacher's permission and know how to use it correctly and safely. On a wide piece of wood, it's possible to plane the end using a block plane or a smoothing plane. Because it is end grain, the plane will split the grain on the far corner. There are several methods that we can use to overcome this problem. The first is to plane from one edge to about 3/4 of the way along, so that the blade doesn't leave the far corner that splits. Then reverse the wood or plane from the other side, again going from the corner to 3/4 of the way along. The plane never leaves the far corner and so won't split the grain. You continue to do this until the end is square. Another method is to clamp a piece of scrap wood. It's the scrap wood then that splits, rather than your piece of wood. This can then be planed in the normal way. The third method is to remove the corner off the wood first. This means that the far edge of the wood will not be planed at all. Whenever you're working with chisels, it's important that the work is held securely. It can be held in similar ways as for sawing, either in a vise, between bench dogs, or clamped to the edge of the bench. Before we use chisels, there are one or two basic safety rules. Chisels are very sharp. They need to be sharp in order to cut effectively and safely. This sharpness needs to be protected, just as you need protecting from it. The first rule is that only one chisel should be carried at a time, and then always at your side and pointing downwards. When you get to the bench, it should be placed securely, either in a tool well if your bench has one, and if it doesn't have one, in the centre of the bench, well away from the edge. When using a chisel, it's important that both hands are behind the cutting edge of the chisel. There is little problem when using a mallet. One hand is holding the chisel, the other the mallet. It's obvious that you'd never chisel towards yourself. When you're hand pairing a joint, I'll just change this chisel. When you're hand pairing a joint, both hands must be on the chisel at the same time. Some people move both hands with the chisel, others hold one hand still and move the chisel through that hand. I prefer this method. But either way, both hands must be touching the chisel so that they're always behind the blade and never in front of it. That's why the work needs to be clamped securely in some way when you're chiseling. Although very sharp and seemingly dangerous, a good chisel really is a joy to use.